Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Mr. Midnight. I know many of you love winding down with these stories as you drift off to sleep, and I'm so glad you're here tonight. Before we begin, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment and let me know where in the world you're listening from. If you enjoy the story, don't forget to like and subscribe so we can share many more nights together. Now find a cozy spot, take a deep breath, and let's relax as we dive into tonight's case. Story number 1.
A dark Texas night, flames rising in the distance. What first looked like a small brush fire quickly turned into something far more disturbing. As firefighters battled the blaze, they stumbled upon a shocking discovery hidden within the smoke and embers: a human body. Nearby, a frantic white dog circled the scene, refusing to leave, as if trying to guard a terrible secret. From that moment on, nothing about this case would be simple, and as investigators began to piece it together, they uncovered a story of betrayal, deception, and violence that no one could have imagined. Mandy Rose Reynolds was born in 1996 in the U.S. state of Idaho. Her biological father's identity was never revealed, but her mother, Carla, was already raising an older son when Mandy came into the world. Eventually, Carla began a new relationship with a man who chose to embrace both children as his own. Together, they formed a household where love and stability were central. It was in that warm environment that Mandy grew up, feeling cared for and supported. From a young age, Mandy stood out for her generous spirit and lively personality. Friends and relatives described her as creative, kind-hearted, and always willing to help anyone who needed support. She carried herself with a spark of joy that made her presence comforting to others. By early 2023, another special bond had taken root in her life. She had adopted a dog, a white pup named Titan. For Mandy, Titan was not just a pet. He was a loyal friend who filled her days with joy, companionship, and a sense of security. He walked with her through quiet evenings, accompanied her on new adventures, and gave her comfort during challenging moments. That same year, Mandy made a big move. She left Idaho behind and relocated to Texas, eager to begin a new chapter. The change of scenery was filled with possibility, and she envisioned a future full of growth. Among her biggest dreams was starting college, something she looked forward to with determination and excitement. In every step of this transition, Titan remained by her side, inseparable from her daily life. Around February and March of 2023, Mandy reconnected with someone from her past. Out of the blue, she received a call from her cousin, Derek. He was only a couple of years older than she was and had been absent from her life for some time. Their conversation, at first casual, quickly led to a request. Derek asked if he could stay at her apartment for a while. True to her generous nature, Mandy agreed. She opened her doors without hesitation, not knowing that this simple act of kindness would bring consequences far darker than she could ever imagine. The events that followed reached a tragic turning point on the night of Wednesday, April 5th, 2023. Emergency services received a call about a fire. At first, it was reported as a minor blaze, possibly just some burning shrubs near a construction site. Firefighters and police were dispatched to investigate. As they worked to put out the flames, they stumbled upon something no one expected. Within the fire lay a body, badly burned and almost unrecognizable. What had started as a routine call now became a crime scene. The responders quickly called for reinforcements, fire investigators, paramedics, and additional police units. Their reports noted that the remains likely belonged to a woman, based on the strap of a bra still visible among the ashes. The night was stormy. Heavy rain and hail pounded the area, making the job even harder for first responders. Adding to the chaos, a frantic white dog circled the site, barking and howling relentlessly. The animal refused to leave, ignoring every attempt by officers to calm him down. Some wondered whether he was trying to scare them away or desperately leading them toward the heart of the tragedy. As the hours passed and the fire was finally extinguished, the body was carefully recovered and taken for examination. The identity remained unknown that night, but the loyal dog stayed near the scene. By the next day, a passerby spotted him again, still lingering in the same place, and contacted animal control. When the dog was scanned for a microchip, the answer emerged. His name was Titan, and he belonged to Mandy Reynolds. Authorities now had a critical lead. With suspicion that the body found in the fire might be Mandy herself, investigators immediately reached out to the phone number associated with Titan's registration. At first, their call went unanswered, but soon after, a woman returned the call, identifying herself as Mandy. The call had been passed on to the lead detective. Following the usual introductions, he asked the woman on the line to describe her pet and provide her address. She explained that her dog was a white mix between a poodle and a retriever, and that although she lived in San Marcos, the animal had slipped away while she was traveling. Her explanation, however, quickly became confusing. She spoke in fragments, referring vaguely to being on the road, visiting friends, and heading toward Wichita. None of it fit together cleanly. This raised the first red flags for the detective, who decided to keep her talking. He asked whether she was staying in Robinson. She denied it, insisting she was heading to Wichita. When pressed, she admitted she had made a stop at a rest area. Asked to repeat her name, she gave it as Mandy, the same as the registered owner of the dog. When questioned about where the microchip had been registered, she claimed she believed it had been entered under her fiancé's name, which was why they had chosen to call the dog Titan. She explained that both she and her fiancé had handled the registration together. By this point, inconsistencies in her story had the detective on alert. He continued questioning, hoping to clarify her movements. She grew impatient, pressing to know whether the dog had been placed in a shelter. The officer confirmed it was under custody, but stretched the exchange further to test her account. When asked again about her direction of travel, she claimed she was going toward Wichita to drop off the dog. The purpose, she said, was that her fiancé wanted to see his sick grandmother. Somewhere along the way, according to her, Titan had bolted from the car at a roadside stop. They had searched for hours, she insisted, but had been unable to find him. The detective asked for more precise details. Where exactly had this happened? The woman described it only as a rest area, similar to a truck stop. When pressed to describe the place, she could provide no further information. She said the incident had happened around 1 a.m. the previous night, though she was not completely certain. The questioning continued. The detective wanted to know what type of vehicle she had been driving in case police needed to coordinate for the dog's return. After hesitation, she finally said it was a silver Toyota Camry, a relatively new model. At that point, her impatience flared again. She interrupted, saying she was at work and only wanted her dog back. She apologized for any trouble and insisted she would come to collect him, though she mentioned the distance would be more than 120 miles. Still unsatisfied, the detective recapped the story, asking again for clarity. The woman reacted with irritation, questioning why she was being interrogated over something so simple. The detective explained that he needed to confirm why this dog, allegedly hers, had been recovered under unusual circumstances. She reaffirmed her name as Mandy. and before hanging up, repeated that she would head to the shelter to collect the animal. Less than an hour later, the detective called her again. This time, his tone was softer, almost conciliatory. He told her that their first conversation might have started on the wrong foot. Then, he carefully explained the real reason for his insistence. The dog had not simply been found wandering by chance. He had been located near the scene of a fire. And at that scene, investigators had discovered a body. The detective, careful with his words, told the caller that he could not share every detail of the situation because the matter was highly sensitive. He hinted at the seriousness of what had been discovered. For a moment, there was silence on the line. Then, the woman let out an exclamation of surprise. She quickly added that she had been deeply worried about Titan, emphasizing how much money had been paid for the dog. She wanted to know how long he had been left outside. The officer explained that his questions were not random. He was trying to build a timeline of events. She apologized again, sounding shaken, and admitted she could not imagine what the dog might have gone through. That became the detective's opening to press further. He asked whether Titan had run off the night before, and she confirmed that he had. The detective pointed out that if that were true, the dog should have been discovered by morning. This detail confused her. In the end, she admitted she could not give an exact answer. During the call, the detective also noticed that the phone number she was using was not registered under her name. When asked about it, she admitted the line belonged to the grandfather of her fiancé. Pressed to provide the grandfather's name for verification, she grew evasive and finally snapped. She argued that the conversation made no sense at all. After all, her dog had simply escaped. Why was she being interrogated? The officer tried to explain that he was only seeking clarity, but her tone grew defensive. She accused him of being too insistent, even suggesting she was being treated like a criminal. The detective clarified that the timeline was crucial, since it might reveal whether the dog had interacted with the body found at the scene. The woman dismissed his explanation and demanded that he stop calling her. Before ending the exchange, the officer made it clear that Titan was in police custody and could not be released. She replied that her lawyer would handle the matter from then on. When the call ended, the detective's instincts told him he was right to be suspicious. The woman's story was inconsistent and her attitude far too defensive for the situation. Acting on that intuition, police contacted local authorities to carry out a welfare check at Mandy's residence. What they found only deepened the mystery. The home was empty. Mandy's belongings were gone, and her car had vanished as well. The questions multiplied. Who had really spoken on the phone? Was it Mandy or someone pretending to be her? And most importantly, was the burned body found at the fire scene connected to her disappearance? Investigators quickly moved to trace Mandy's vehicle using license plate databases. Their search revealed the car had been spotted in Wichita, more than 600 miles away. This triggered a focused hunt for the missing automobile. While that search was underway, forensic evidence provided the breakthrough. Dental records confirmed the worst fear. The remains found at the fire site were those of 26-year-old Mandy Reynolds. The autopsy revealed she had been shot in the head before her body was set on fire in an attempt to destroy evidence. Investigators also determined that her remains had been placed inside a large plastic storage container where they recovered a spent shell casing. On April 7th, police discovered Mandy's personal belongings inside an abandoned truck left several miles from her home. The pieces were beginning to fit together, pointing toward a calculated crime rather than a tragic accident. On April 8th, the very next day, police in Wichita spotted the missing car. Officers attempted a traffic stop, but instead of complying, the driver suddenly accelerated, weaving recklessly through traffic at speeds exceeding 130 miles per hour. What followed was a chaotic 30-minute pursuit across busy streets. During the chase, the suspect rammed several patrol vehicles in a desperate bid to escape. Remarkably, no one was injured. Eventually, the car screeched to a halt and the driver bolted on foot, racing toward a crowded supermarket. Surveillance footage later captured the frantic scene as he pushed inside. Police armed with long rifles quickly set up a perimeter, warning bystanders to stay inside their cars. Inside the store, shoppers fled in panic as officers moved in. Seconds later, shouts echoed from one of the aisles. The fugitive had been discovered hiding beneath a shelf stacked with canned goods. Officers ordered him out, then dragged him by the arms and placed him in handcuffs. The man was identified as Derek Daigneault. He was arrested on the spot, held on a $1 million bond, and placed in a Kansas jail while awaiting extradition to Texas for the murder of his cousin, Mandy Reynolds. In addition to the murder charge, Derek now faced 15 separate counts tied to the dangerous chase. Inside the abandoned vehicle, investigators found a firearm. Ballistics confirmed it matched the shell casing discovered in the plastic container where Mandy's body had been burned. For Mandy's mother, the discovery was devastating. She had already lost her daughter, and now the prime suspect was her own nephew. In a fundraiser post for funeral expenses, she expressed her belief that Derek had approached Mandy under false pretenses, manipulating her into letting him stay. It soon came to light that when Derek moved into Mandy's home, he had been out on parole for a felony. His record stretched back years, with violent incidents even during his teenage years, including an attack with a firearm. Evidence against him mounted when police uncovered surveillance footage from a store on the very day Mandy's body was found. Derek was seen purchasing a large plastic container identical to the one used in the crime, along with a shovel and a gas can. The footage even showed Titan in the car, his head poking out of the window. Investigators also suspected that Derek himself was the person who had called the police station pretending to be Mandy, though this was never officially confirmed. What was undeniable, however, was the forensic evidence. The bullet recovered from Mandy's body and the casing near the container both matched the gun in Derek's possession, a weapon registered to his grandmother. In January 2024, Derek pleaded guilty to a series of charges tied to the pursuit in Wichita: fleeing or attempting to elude an officer, aggravated assault, illegal possession of a firearm by a convicted felon, and theft. 2 months later, a Kansas judge sentenced him to just over 9 years in prison for those crimes. Afterward, he was transferred to face trial in Texas for Mandy's murder. The trial began in early November 2024. For the jury, the media, and the community, it was an unsettling look into Derek's troubled past. The prosecution described him as extremely violent and a persistent danger to society. On November 7th, after less than an hour of deliberations, the jury returned with its verdict. Derek was guilty and sentenced to life in prison. In court, Mandy's mother, her stepfather, and her older brother delivered heart-wrenching victim impact statements. They spoke of their grief, their devastation, and the hole left in their lives. But as they spoke, Derek interrupted, hurling insults and even accusing his own cousin of being a criminal. Court officers quickly escorted him out, but tensions flared between the families, leading to a heated altercation inside the courthouse. Outside, as Derek was led back to jail, he seized the moment to speak to reporters. He insisted once more that his cousin had committed crimes, and when pressed about his own actions, he coldly admitted, without remorse, "I am a criminal." His attorney later thanked the jury for their work, but voiced deep disappointment with both the verdict and the sentence, announcing plans to appeal. For the district attorney's office, the outcome was a victory for justice. In a public statement, they highlighted two key factors that made the case: the unwavering loyalty of a heroic dog and the seamless cooperation of multiple law enforcement agencies across state lines. These combined efforts, they emphasized, brought justice for Mandy and protected the community from a dangerous offender. As for Titan, he found a safe new home with Mandy's best friend, who assured the press that the little dog was thriving. And yet, one haunting question remains: why? What could have driven Derek to betray and destroy the very cousin who had offered him kindness and shelter? The truth about his motives may never fully be known. Some secrets, it seems, remain buried, leaving behind a story marked not only by tragedy but also by unanswered questions.
Story number 2.
It was the early morning of February 3rd, 2003 in Los Angeles. A black Mercedes climbed up the quiet hill to a massive mansion known as the Pyrenees Castle. Inside the car was a woman who had once been part of Hollywood's spotlight, and by her side was one of the most famous names in the music industry. Around 3 in the morning, they stepped inside the house. The driver, Adriano de Souza, stayed outside, waiting in the car. For a while, everything seemed calm. The night was silent, the mansion still. But just before dawn, that silence was broken. A single, sharp sound echoed from inside, something that felt like a gunshot. Minutes later, the front door opened. Phil Spector appeared, holding a gun in his hand. What had just happened inside the castle would soon shock the world and change both of their lives forever. Lana Clarkson was born on April 5, 1962 in Long Beach, a coastal city in Southern California. She was the daughter of Donna and James Clarkson, and she grew up with 2 siblings, Jesse and Fawn. Lana's childhood years were spent in Sonoma County, a region known for its rolling hills, open meadows, and endless vineyards, the heart of California's wine country. Surrounded by nature, she experienced a childhood that mixed small-town warmth with the ambition of someone who always dreamed bigger. But tragedy struck early in her life. Lana lost her father while still very young, and the grief weighed heavily on her family. Christmas of 1978 was especially painful, and soon after, the Clarksons decided to move to Los Angeles. By that time, Lana had finished high school and her passion for the arts was clear. She didn't just want a job, she wanted a life on stage and screen. Tall, striking, and naturally charismatic, she seemed made for the entertainment world. At nearly 6 feet tall, with long legs, blonde hair, and clear eyes, she carried the kind of presence that drew people in. Those close to her described her as adventurous, warm, and free-spirited. By the early 1980s, Lana was determined to carve out a career in acting and modeling. She began appearing in television and film, often working as an extra in smaller productions. It was a humble start, but it was also the beginning of a path she believed in. During this same period, she also gave her time to charity. In 1980, she became a volunteer with Project Angel Food, an organization that delivered meals to people living with HIV in Los Angeles. At a time when the disease was highly stigmatized, Lana showed no fear. Helping others was as much a part of her identity as acting. Her official acting debut came in 1982 when she landed a small role in Fast Times at Ridgemont High, a coming-of-age comedy that would go on to become iconic. She played the wife of a science teacher, her first time with lines on screen. The following year, in 1983, she appeared in Scarface, sharing a scene with Michelle Pfeiffer. Though brief, it was the type of moment any aspiring actress would treasure. That same year, she starred in Deathstalker, a fantasy film that gained a cult following. But it was in 1985 that Lana Clarkson secured the role she would be most remembered for. In Barbarian Queen, she played the warrior Amathea, a strong and fearless heroine who fought with both power and sensuality. The film quickly became a cult classic, and her performance turned her into a recognizable figure among fans of fantasy and B-movies. Later roles included the sci-fi film Blind Date directed by Nico Mastorakis and smaller parts in Amazon Women on the Moon in 1987. Beyond film, Lana's career branched out into television, commercials, and modeling campaigns for major brands like Mercedes-Benz. Her work allowed her to travel across the United States and internationally. She visited countries like Japan, Greece, Argentina, Italy, Switzerland, France, Jamaica, and Mexico while pursuing different projects. Despite her beauty, talent, and dedication, her career plateaued. She never quite reached the fame she hoped for, but she did gain a loyal fan base. Her appearances at comic conventions kept her in the spotlight, where fans lined up for autographs and photos. Many of them had first seen her as the Barbarian Queen, and they continued to admire her years later. Lana Clarkson may not have become a Hollywood A-lister, but she became an icon in her own right, someone who left a mark on a generation of fans who never forgot her presence on screen. By the late 1990s, Lana Clarkson was looking for new ways to connect with her audience and keep her career alive. She had built a loyal fan base from her cult films, and she decided to create her own website. Through it, she sold DVDs of her movies, many of them personally autographed, and kept in touch with fans on a message board. It gave her not only an income stream, but also a sense of belonging and appreciation from people who still admired her work. But as she reached her 40s, Hollywood became a tougher place. Roles grew fewer, auditions led to closed doors, and it was no longer possible to support herself as a full-time actress. Facing these challenges, Lana made a practical decision. In January 2003, she accepted a part-time job as a hostess at the House of Blues, a famous club in Los Angeles known for its live music and celebrity crowd. The position wasn't glamorous, but it allowed her to pay her bills while still staying close to the entertainment scene she loved. Her role was to welcome and take care of high-profile guests, ensuring they felt at home in the exclusive VIP areas. On the night of February 3rd, 2003, Lana went to work as usual. She had no way of knowing that this ordinary evening would mark the beginning of the end. That night, one of the most famous figures in music history walked into the House of Blues, legendary record producer Phil Spector. Their meeting seemed unremarkable at first, yet this chance encounter would soon lead to one of Hollywood's darkest tragedies. To understand what happened, we need to look back at the life of Phil Spector himself. Born Harvey Philip Spector on December 26, 1939, he grew up in the Bronx, New York. His family was of Russian Jewish descent, middle class, and close-knit. But when Phil was only 9 years old, his life changed forever. On April 20th, 1949, his father locked himself inside a running car and ended his own life by carbon monoxide poisoning. The loss shattered the young boy, leaving a scar that would follow him throughout his life. In 1953, Phil's mother moved the family to Los Angeles, hoping for a fresh start. By the age of 19, Phil was attending college when he met other people who shared his passion for music. Together, they formed a group called the Teddy Bears, with Phil as guitarist and songwriter. He penned a song inspired by the words engraved on his father's tombstone. To know him is to love him. That single, released in 1958, became an unexpected hit, climbing all the way to number one on the Billboard Hot 100 by December of that year. Despite the success, lightning didn't strike twice. The group recorded a few more tracks, but none reached the same level of fame. By 1959, the Teddy Bears had dissolved, and Phil drifted into isolation for a while. Eventually, he returned to the music industry, this time focusing not on performing, but on producing. It was behind the studio glass that he truly came alive. He soon partnered with two other producers at a small label called Junior Records. But Spector's ambition was relentless. In October 1962, he bought out his partners and took full control. From there, he launched his own company, Phillies Records. Under Phillies, Spector produced 21 singles, sold more than 13 million copies, and earned 9 gold records. By the age of 21, he wasn't just a success, he was a millionaire, with a fortune estimated at over $2 million. Phil Spector was now one of the most influential figures in American music. But as Lana Clarkson would soon discover, behind the fame and brilliance was a man with a much darker side. In his early days as a producer, Phil Spector worked alongside some of the biggest names in music, including Elvis Presley and Roy Peterson. His talent for shaping sound and creating hits quickly earned him a reputation as one of the most promising young minds in the industry. But it was the year 1963 that truly changed the course of his career. That year, he introduced the world to a new girl group called the Ronettes. The trio consisted of sisters Ronnie and Estelle Bennett, along with their cousin Nedra Talley. Before Spector stepped in, they had been performing under the name the Darling Sisters. With Phil behind the scenes, everything about their presentation changed, from their look to their sound, and soon they became one of the most recognizable acts of the 1960s. Spector also unveiled what would become his signature contribution to the history of music, the wall of sound. This was a production technique that layered multiple instruments and voices, creating a dense, almost orchestral effect that filled every corner of a recording. It was unlike anything people had heard before, and it gave his music an unmistakable, larger-than-life quality. The innovation cemented his reputation as a genius and pioneer in the studio. Many would later credit him with reshaping the way popular music was made and recorded. Over the years, Phil Spector worked with some of the most celebrated artists in the world. He produced for the Ramones, Tina Turner, Cher, John Lennon, and George Harrison. In fact, Lennon and Harrison, both former members of the Beatles, sought his expertise when they needed someone to rework unfinished material from the Get Back sessions, songs that would eventually form part of the album Let It Be. Having Phil Spector on a project was a mark of prestige, but it came with a price. Behind the wall of fame and fortune, there was another side to Phil Spector, a side that was dark, volatile, and often dangerous. Many accounts described him as controlling, abusive, and frightening. His partners later revealed that he was violent and manipulative, often carrying a gun that he would use to intimidate them. And this behavior wasn't limited to his personal life. In the studio, artists reported similar experiences. Members of the Ramones recalled that he once pulled out a firearm and fired shots while they were working together. Even John Lennon, one of the most famous musicians in the world, found himself shaken after Spector suddenly fired a gun at the ceiling during a recording session. His private life was equally troubled. Spector was married twice, and at one point, he adopted 3 children. Later, those same children accused him of keeping them in near isolation and subjecting them to disturbing situations, including being forced to act out inappropriate scenarios. He also fathered additional children with another woman, though he never married her. By the early 2000s, Phil's reputation in the industry was a strange mix of brilliance and chaos. He was celebrated as a musical legend, but whispered about as a man no one truly trusted. On February 3, 2003, Spector walked into the House of Blues in Los Angeles, where Lana Clarkson was working as a hostess. He arrived with another woman by his side and was clearly intoxicated. When Lana approached him, she didn't immediately recognize who he was. Some accounts say she even mistook him for a woman, an error that cut straight to the ego of a man who thrived on power and recognition. To someone like Phil Spector, who carried himself with extreme arrogance, the slight felt humiliating. Realizing her mistake, Lana quickly tried to make up for it. Despite the busy crowd that night, she gave him extra attention, ensuring he felt acknowledged and respected. Other versions of the story suggest something different, that Lana recognized him instantly and was especially attentive because she knew that someone of his stature might offer her a path back into the entertainment industry. Whatever the truth, the night passed, and as closing time came near, Lana prepared to leave. But Phil had other plans. Before she could go home, he extended an invitation. He asked Lana to join him at his mansion for a drink, a casual gathering that seemed harmless on the surface. Lana Clarkson agreed to go. She stepped into the car, and Phil Spector's driver, Adriano de Souza, took the wheel. Their destination was Spector's extravagant estate, a 33-room mansion perched high on a hilltop, famously called the Pyrenees Castle. It was the early hours of February 3, 2003, about 3 in the morning, when the car rolled up to the gates. Lana and Phil went inside, while Adriano, who spoke little English, waited patiently outside in the car. His instructions were simple: stay ready in case his boss wanted to leave again. For a while, the night seemed calm. But around 5 o'clock in the morning, Adriano's world changed. From the silence of the property, a sudden, sharp sound cut through the air, a noise he instantly thought was a gunshot. He froze, staring at the mansion, straining to catch any sign of what was happening inside. A few minutes later, the front door opened. Phil Spector appeared, unsteady on his feet, a pistol in his hand. According to the driver, Spector muttered that he believed he had killed someone. Terrified, Adriano picked up his phone and dialed 911 to report what he had just seen. When police officers arrived at the castle, they found Spector visibly drunk, behaving strangely and refusing to follow basic commands. He ignored orders to raise his hands and seemed detached from the gravity of the situation. It took several tense minutes before officers finally made their way inside. What they discovered was horrifying. Lana Clarkson was dead. She was slumped in a white chair, her body still, the fabric around her stained with blood. She had been shot in the mouth, and a firearm lay near her left ankle. The scene painted a chilling picture. Phil Spector quickly began shifting his story. Instead of admitting what he had told Adriano outside, he insisted Lana had put the gun in her mouth herself. At times, he suggested it was an accident, that she kissed the weapon and it went off. Other times, he hinted that perhaps she had wanted to end her life. None of his explanations matched the evidence. Police arrested him on the spot. Their search of the mansion turned up 8 more guns and even blood traces in one of the bathrooms. The next day, February 4th, 2003, Spector posted bail. $1 million was enough to walk out of jail, and for a man of his wealth, it was hardly a challenge. He remained free for more than 6 years as the case made its way through the courts. In 2006, he married Rochelle Short, a woman close to him and deeply familiar with his personal world. Some believed the marriage was a strategic move to keep her from testifying against him at trial, but it didn't stop the case from moving forward. The first trial began in March 2007. Spector faced charges of second-degree murder, but in September of that same year, it ended in a mistrial, as jurors couldn't reach a unanimous verdict. The following year, in October 2008, he was tried again. This time, the proceedings were broadcast on television, capturing national attention. Inside the courtroom, Spector was unpredictable. He changed lawyers multiple times, clashed with his own defense team, and made strange declarations. He claimed Lana had chosen to end her life, while also admitting he took medication for schizophrenia, despite not being diagnosed with the condition. He described himself as bipolar, spoke of being his own worst enemy, and even confessed to fighting demons inside him. As the trial unfolded, his dark past resurfaced in painful detail. One of his sons described him as a psychopath, recalling how, at just 12 years old, he and his brother were blindfolded and forced into disturbing scenarios orchestrated by their father. 5 other women came forward with chillingly similar accusations that Spector had pressured them into sexual acts while threatening them with a gun. 2 of them even contacted the police at the time, but later withdrew their complaints. In every case, alcohol played a role. The most damning testimony came from Adriano de Souza, the driver who never once wavered in his story. He repeated what he had heard that night, that Phil Spector stepped out of his mansion with a gun and admitted he thought he had killed someone. After 9 days of deliberation, the jury reached its decision. The prosecution painted Phil as a dangerous man with a history of playing Russian roulette with women's lives. On May 29, 2009, Phil Spector was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to 19 years to life in prison, with no chance of parole. When the verdict was read, Spector showed no emotion. A reporter from a major news network described him as completely still, his face frozen, his voice silent, offering no reaction at all. Even in prison, Spector made headlines. He requested a divorce from Rochelle Short in a letter, accusing her of draining his $35 million fortune on expensive cars, luxury clothes, and lavish trips. The divorce never went through, but the accusations made the news. He also maintained his bizarre persona, giving interviews to newspapers and magazines, posing for photos in oversized sunglasses and wigs, as if clinging to the eccentric image he had cultivated for decades. But time and fate caught up with him. On January 16, 2021, Phil Spector died at the age of 81. Reports stated the cause was complications from COVID-19, which he had contracted 4 weeks earlier. He was rushed from his prison cell to a hospital after suffering breathing problems, but doctors could not save him. Years earlier, in 2013, HBO had produced a 92-minute film about his life, with Al Pacino portraying Spector on screen. The case remained one of the most publicized in Hollywood history, fueled by his fame and the shocking violence behind Lana Clarkson's death. For many who had known him, the outcome was not surprising. They had seen his dangerous side long before the tragedy at the Pyrenees Castle. Still, there was a sense of sadness that someone once hailed as a brilliant innovator in music ended his life defined not by genius, but by darkness, destruction, and a legacy forever tainted.
Story number 3.
It started off like a normal night. Patrick Sean Betts, an 11-year-old boy from Upland, California, was out with his mom and sister at their favorite pizza place. He was happy, laughing, and doing what most kids loved to do in the 80s, playing arcade games and eating pizza. At one point, Patrick asked his mom for some change and went off to play in the back arcade. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but then something happened. Patrick walked out of that pizza place and never came home. What really happened that night? Why did it take so long for anyone to start looking for him? And how could a case with so many strange twists go unnoticed for so long? Patrick Sean Betts was born on June 21, 1976, to Dennis and Barbara Betts, longtime residents of Upland, California. He grew up surrounded by sunshine, skateboards, and the kind of freedom that only kids in the 80s truly understood. Patrick went to Sierra Vista Elementary, and from an early age, it was clear that he had a big personality packed into a small frame. His mom, Barbara, described him as cheerful and easygoing, while his friends saw someone a little more layered, playful and street smart, a kid who didn't fall for nonsense but still had a sparkle in his eye. He was polite, helpful, and had a natural curiosity, often spending time at the local Radio Shack where he liked to hang out. His humor was sharp for his age, the kind that made people laugh and want to be around him. One of the closest people in Patrick's life was Kevin, his best friend who lived just across the street. Kevin had some health issues that kept him homebound, and not many kids made the effort to connect with him. But Patrick did, wholeheartedly. The two became inseparable, their friendship rooted in trust and genuine kindness. Like many kids of the time, Patrick loved video games, baseball, and skateboarding. His bond with Kevin deepened his love for baseball, especially since Kevin's dad coached the local Little League team. At night, Patrick couldn't sleep without his favorite blanket, a soft, comforting item that, for him, meant security and home. Then came January 20th, 1988, a day no one in the Betts family would ever forget. It started off as nothing out of the ordinary. Patrick, his mom Barbara, and his older sister Pamela were enjoying an evening at Pizza Chalet, a popular family spot in Upland with a built-in arcade. Patrick, as usual, made a beeline for the games after asking his mom for some quarters. He had recently become friends with the son of the restaurant's owner, and the two would spend hours playing together there. Although Barbara didn't know this new friend very well, she felt comfortable enough to let Patrick go play. Later that evening, Patrick came back to his mom to ask if he could go to a basketball game at Upland High with his friend. Thinking the game was nearby and trusting her son's judgment, Barbara gave him the okay. As Patrick walked out the door, he turned and asked her to save him a slice of pizza. It was a casual moment, something any parent would hear and smile at, but tragically, it would be the last time Barbara ever saw her son. The game they had wanted to watch was actually in Chino, nearly 8 miles away, a fact that the boys hadn't realized. Disappointed, they returned to Pizza Chalet and passed the time by going back to the arcade. Patrick was last seen around 9 p.m. playing video games there. After that, he said he was heading home, but he never made it. That night, his family waited anxiously, watching the door, hoping he'd walk in, maybe a little embarrassed for being late. But hours passed, then the entire night. When the sun rose, it brought only dread. Patrick was missing. One would assume the local police would launch a thorough investigation immediately. But that wasn't what happened. Instead, Upland authorities quickly brushed it off, suggesting that Patrick had simply run away. They told his devastated family he'd be back once he got hungry. This theory seemed absurd to Barbara and Dennis. Yes, Patrick had been involved in a minor school altercation shortly before his disappearance, and there was a scheduled juvenile court date coming up, but he wasn't anxious about it. He hadn't expressed any desire to run, and nothing in his behavior indicated he planned to. In fact, his favorite blanket, his nighttime must-have, was still in his room. His clothes, his belongings, everything was untouched. If Patrick had truly run away, wouldn't he have taken something with him? But investigators stuck to their runaway theory. No Amber Alerts, no immediate search, no sense of urgency. To make matters worse, Upland wasn't exactly the safest town. With a population of just over 78,000, the city had a crime rate a few percentage points higher than the national average. Statistically, 5 serious crimes happened there every day, enough to raise red flags, especially when a child vanished. Determined not to let their son become just another missing poster on a wall, the family launched their own search, going door to door through Upland with flyers and questions for anyone who might have seen something, anything. Their first stop, of course, was Pizza Chalet, the last place Patrick had been seen. They asked around, desperate for a lead, and finally caught a possible break. A woman who worked at a nearby beauty supply store mentioned seeing Patrick walk in with an older teenage boy. At first, it seemed like a glimmer of hope, but the woman's memory was hazy. The details kept slipping. First she was sure, then unsure, and at one point she couldn't even recall if Patrick had been alone or not. The Betts family suspected the boy might have been the son of the pizzeria owner, but since the witness couldn't describe the teen clearly, there was no way to confirm it. Just like that, the lead fizzled out, and they were back to square one. The emotional toll was unbearable. The family was growing more frantic by the day, and their pleas to the police became more desperate. They insisted, again and again, that Patrick had not run away. Finally, after nearly 4 months of pushing, the authorities agreed to fully investigate. But by then, 4 precious months had already passed. When it comes to missing persons, the first 48 to 72 hours are vital. It's during this short window that evidence is still fresh, and the chances of finding someone alive are significantly higher. Once that window closes, the likelihood of answers or recovery drops dramatically, and the Betts family knew it. Though they were relieved to see law enforcement finally involved, they couldn't shake the gut-wrenching feeling that the delay had cost them everything. Adding to their heartbreak was the complete lack of media coverage. Because police had initially labeled Patrick as a runaway, his disappearance was met with silence. Only a few articles ever made it to print, and there was virtually no attention from TV or local news outlets. It was as if Patrick had been forgotten before the search had even begun. But the family remembered everything, and they never stopped watching for anything strange. The day after Patrick vanished, something chilling happened. Sierra Vista Elementary received a phone call. The woman on the other end claimed to be Patrick's grandmother and told the school that he wouldn't be returning because he was moving to Washington to live with her. The call was deeply unsettling. For one, the voice didn't belong to Patrick's actual grandmother, but more disturbingly, the caller knew specific details, the name of Patrick's school, and the fact that his real grandmother had once lived in Washington. In reality, Patrick's grandmother had moved from Washington to California months before his disappearance. She had been battling cancer, and Patrick adored her. He was always by her side, helping however he could. Tragically, she passed away still not knowing what had happened to her grandson. The eerie phone call left the family shaken. Was it someone trying to cover their tracks? Or a cruel prank? Either way, it added to the growing list of mysteries surrounding Patrick's disappearance, and because it was 1988, there was no way to trace the call, no caller ID, no digital footprint, just one more dead end. But the oddities didn't stop there. 4 months after Patrick disappeared, something else strange happened, this time involving the very place he had last been seen. Pizza Chalet, once a lively hangout for local families, abruptly shut down. The owners packed up and left Upland without warning. Word soon got out that they had relocated to Los Angeles, and when police followed up, they found the family, but only briefly. Before long, they left again, this time reportedly heading overseas to the Middle East, their country of origin. To the Betts family, This wasn't just odd, it was alarming. Why would a thriving business vanish so suddenly? Why leave so quickly, right after a child had gone missing on their premises? Investigators managed to track down the owners in Los Angeles, but not for long. Once they left the country, the trail went cold again. And worse, no one ever learned the name of the owner's son, the same boy Patrick had been seen playing with that night. That meant police couldn't interview him, and the possible connection the beauty store clerk mentioned could never be confirmed. Once again, the Betts family found themselves at a dead end. Their frustration was mounting. It was like they were trapped in a nightmare with no exit. Every potential lead ended in confusion or silence. And just when they thought things couldn't get more maddening, the police made a decision that left the family completely stunned. At one point, for reasons that still remain unclear, investigators in Upland turned their attention to an unexpected suspect, Patrick's older brother. He was just 15 years old when Patrick went missing, and yet somehow police became convinced he was involved. How they arrived at that conclusion is anyone's guess. The problem? There wasn't a shred of evidence backing their claims. Patrick's brother had an ironclad alibi. On the night Patrick vanished, he was hundreds of miles away in San Francisco, performing with his band. His fellow bandmates confirmed he'd been on stage that entire night, 7 hours from Upland. There was no possible way he could have been involved, but that didn't stop the police. Without notifying his family, they took the teenager in for questioning and kept him for over 5 hours. When the Betts family finally found out and rushed to the station, they were horrified to learn he was in the middle of a polygraph test, a test he reportedly failed. From there, things escalated. Officers even ordered him to write a confession, despite having no grounds for such a demand. The Betts family was furious. Their grief had already consumed them, and now they were forced to watch another son get emotionally torn apart over baseless accusations. Tragically, the ordeal left permanent scars. Already struggling with anxiety, Patrick's brother later developed PTSD, a diagnosis that only deepened the community's suspicions instead of evoking sympathy. People assumed his trauma was a sign of guilt, when in reality, it was the aftermath of being wrongfully targeted at such a young age. Sadly, this wasn't the last time Upland investigators turned the Betts family's life upside down. In 1991, more than 3 years after Patrick vanished, the family was jolted awake before dawn by loud knocks and flashing lights. At 6 in the morning, Upland police returned, this time armed with a search warrant. The family, still disoriented and confused, looked out their windows to find their home surrounded by officers, bloodhounds, and even people in hazmat suits. They hadn't been given any warning or explanation. The search went on for more than 12 hours, stretching into the evening. Every room was examined, the backyard was combed through, and all without telling the family what they were even looking for. Months later, they finally found out why. An anonymous tip had been phoned in, claiming Patrick's body was buried somewhere beneath the house. Without verifying the legitimacy of the call, investigators charged ahead and treated the family like suspects. The experience left them shattered. According to Patrick's sister, who had just given birth to twins at the time, the officers were cold and dismissive, completely devoid of compassion. The search yielded nothing. Just like the tip, it led nowhere. And still, no answers. Despite everything the family endured, Patrick's case remained in the shadows. It barely received any attention from the media. There were no televised appeals, no headlines, and only a handful of articles in local outlets. One of the only times Patrick's face reached a larger audience was in 1993, when his photo was featured in Soul Asylum's music video, Runaway Train. The video was part of a powerful campaign to raise awareness about missing children. Alongside 35 other faces, Patrick's image appeared, flickering on screen in the hope that someone, somewhere, might recognize him. And while the campaign was a rare success, 26 of the 36 children featured were found, it wasn't enough to bring Patrick home. Years passed. The case went cold. Then, something strange happened. What happened next only deepened the mystery surrounding Patrick's disappearance. One day, while Patrick's nephew, now grown and working as a security officer, was on duty, an older man approached him and started making small talk. Nothing seemed unusual at first, until the stranger casually referred to Patrick by the name Sean. That was the name Patrick's friends and family always used, his middle name, the one rarely mentioned in public. The nephew had never shared that detail. What followed was even more disturbing. The man began talking about Patrick's case with surprising familiarity, as if he had followed it for years. He rattled off facts and details that left the nephew chilled. After all, Patrick's disappearance had never received much attention. Beyond a single appearance in a music video from the early 90s, his story remained largely unknown. So how could a random man not only know his name, but also the intricate pieces of a case that barely anyone ever discussed? Some believed that perhaps the man had simply heard about Patrick growing up in Upland. Maybe it was just small-town knowledge passed along over the years. But Patrick's loved ones weren't convinced. They had always felt like his case had been ignored, brushed aside, not something strangers would remember, let alone bring up decades later. Unfortunately, no one was able to identify the man or find out where he came from. He vanished as quickly as he appeared, leaving behind nothing but unease and unanswered questions. In February 2022, after so many years of silence, Patrick's case found new life, thanks to the internet. A true crime YouTube channel called Crime Hound featured Patrick's story after a subscriber from Upland requested it. That same month, a Upland City Council meeting became an emotional moment of public plea, as Patrick's 73-year-old mother, Barbara, and his sister, Pamela, stood before the mayor and council members asking for help. Stephen was also present and shared Patrick's story with the officials, hoping it would finally lead to answers. During that meeting, Barbara revealed something heartbreaking. Her husband, Dennis, Patrick's father, had passed away back in 2009 without ever knowing what happened to his son. Her voice trembled with grief as she explained that while she no longer believed Patrick was alive, she still clung to one final wish: to bring him home, even if it was only to lay him to rest. After more than 3 decades, her pain had not faded. It had simply settled deeper. Pamela, too, made a powerful demand. She urged law enforcement to use modern investigative tools, DNA profiling, forensic databases, anything available now that hadn't existed back then. Technology had evolved, she argued, and so had the chances of solving cold cases. But investigators hit the same wall they always had. Without a suspect or even a person of interest, they had no one from whom to collect DNA. Still, something had shifted. After years of stagnation, new eyes were finally looking at the case. Detectives began re-examining witness statements and reviewing possible leads. While no major breakthroughs had come yet, the renewed attention offered something the Betts family hadn't felt in years: hope. Sadly, Barbara's health was beginning to decline. Pamela expressed that they were now racing against time, not just to solve the mystery, but to give her mother the closure she had waited far too long for. Patrick would be 48 years old today. The idea that he might still be alive seems more and more unlikely. And yet, the thought that he may have been kidnapped and raised by someone else still lingers in the background. If he were out there, wouldn't he have come forward by now? Still, hope doesn't fade easily. Even if Patrick is no longer alive, the Betts family simply wants the truth. They want to know what happened. They want justice. They want peace.
Story number 4.
Lake Wylie, South Carolina. A summer afternoon, quiet except for the distant hum of a lawnmower. Inside a sprawling waterfront mansion, a man lies motionless at the bottom of a grand staircase. The house is still, sunlight spilling through the windows, as if nothing is wrong. Yet something is very wrong. Moments later, a woman bursts through the front door, running into the street, waving her arms for help. Her voice is panicked, her words urgent. Her husband needs medical attention. Within minutes, paramedics arrive. But as they step inside, what they find doesn't look quite right. And soon, small details, barely noticeable at first, begin to unravel a story far darker than anyone could have imagined. Steve Clayton's story begins in South Florida, where he was born around 1954. Details of his childhood are scarce, but one thing was certain. He had a remarkable capacity for kindness and an unwavering belief in helping others succeed. Friends, colleagues, and family would later describe him as the type of man who not only built his own path, but reached back to guide others along theirs. By the time Steve was 30, he had qualified as an accountant and launched a physical therapy practice specializing in sports injuries. His drive and determination paid off. Business thrived, clients poured in, and his reputation grew. At just 42, Steve sold his multi-million-dollar company, entering a well-earned early retirement. Retirement, however, did not mean idleness. Steve poured his time into mentoring young entrepreneurs, teaching them the lessons he had learned from decades of hard work. Many of them would later say his guidance changed the trajectory of their careers. Steve was a man of vibrant energy, charismatic, sociable, the life of the party. Though he never had children, he adored being an uncle. He also had a complicated love life, marrying 6 or possibly 7 times. His last marriage would be the one that changed everything. In 2010, Steve moved to North Carolina. It was there that he met Lana Clayton through an online dating site. She was a nurse, dedicated to caring for patients in several Veterans Affairs hospitals. To Steve, her nurturing nature was irresistible. They married in November 2013. 2 years later, the couple relocated to an opulent waterfront mansion on Lake Wylie, South Carolina, a property modeled after George Washington's Mount Vernon estate. It was an impressive setting, surrounded by serene waters and rolling greenery. By all appearances, life was good. Steve's family grew close to Lana, believing she made him happy. There were no outward signs of trouble, though Lana would later paint a very different picture of their marriage, one only she could fully explain. Everything changed on July 21, 2018. Around 1 p.m., Lana rushed from the house in a panic, flagging down motorcyclist James Blacklage. She claimed Steve needed urgent help and begged him to call 911. James did so, watching as she ran to another neighbor for assistance. Curiously, when that neighbor entered the house to check on Steve, Lana stayed outside. Emergency responders arrived minutes later. Body camera footage captured their entry into the grand home, eventually leading to the bottom of the main staircase. There, beneath a white sheet, lay Steve Clayton. He was pronounced dead at the scene. Lana told authorities that Steve had recently suffered from vertigo, intense dizziness that sometimes caused him to collapse. She explained he had been ill for days, unable to leave bed. On the morning of his death, she checked on him around 11 a.m., then went outside to mow the expansive lawn for about 2 hours. Upon returning inside, she said, she found him at the foot of the stairs. Given his age, medical history, and the visible scene, Investigators initially believed it was a tragic accident, or perhaps a heart attack. Years earlier, Steve had suffered decompression sickness after a diving trip in the Bahamas when he ascended too quickly and failed to follow safety protocols. The injury had lasting effects, and even after months of rehabilitation, he continued to experience related health problems. To many at the scene, his death appeared natural, but not everyone accepted that explanation. Steve's nephew, Nick French, a police officer from a neighboring county, arrived quickly after hearing the news. As he surveyed the house and the circumstances, he began to see warning signs that others had overlooked, subtle details that hinted something was not as it seemed. From the beginning, certain details about Lana's behavior on the day Steve died seemed off. She had not one, but two phones in the house. She was a trained nurse, someone who understood the urgency of medical emergencies. Yet instead of calling 911 herself, she ran out into the street, flagged down a passing motorcyclist, and asked him to call for help. From there, she hurried to a neighbor's home. Of course, it's true that panic can cloud judgment. Even experienced professionals can freeze or act irrationally under extreme stress. But still, bypassing two phones within reach to search for a stranger to make the call seemed illogical, and it cost precious minutes. Nick French, Steve's nephew and a police officer, noticed another detail immediately. The staircase in the home had a runner, a strip of carpet that wasn't nailed down, just laid loosely on the steps. It was perfectly aligned, completely undisturbed. If Steve, a man of his size, had fallen down those stairs, the runner would have shifted, but it hadn't. The lack of physical evidence to support a fall was just the start. Steve bore no injuries consistent with tumbling down an entire flight of stairs. Perhaps, some suggested, he only slipped near the bottom, one or two steps at most. But to Nick, nothing matched the story. Lana's conduct in the aftermath raised further questions. Within hours, she was telling those around her that she wanted Steve cremated immediately. When the deputy coroner explained that an examination could reveal the cause of death and provide closure, she showed no interest. She didn't want an autopsy. She wanted him sent to the morgue and cremated without delay. Her explanation for this urgency? According to Lana, Steve had been a heavy drug user, and she feared an autopsy would tarnish his reputation. But those who knew him well dismissed that claim. Steve occasionally smoked marijuana and enjoyed a Long Island iced tea, but he was far from an addict. When Nick mentioned calling Steve's other nephew, Chris, to inform him of the death, Lana resisted, firmly, 3 separate times. She insisted Chris shouldn't see Steve like that, but Chris was an adult, and Nick felt he had the right to know. Eventually, Nick ignored her objections and made the call himself. That decision led him upstairs, where he made 2 troubling discoveries. Steve's cell phone was missing, an alarming detail given he always kept it close. Even after a thorough search, it was never found. Investigators would later suspect Lana had removed it days earlier, effectively cutting Steve off from outside help. The second discovery was even more disturbing. The master bedroom was in a state of severe neglect. The bed was saturated with urine, a clear sign Steve had been left without proper care while sick in bed. To Nick, it suggested abandonment, especially shocking given Lana's nursing background. If she had truly been tending to her husband, the bedding would have been changed, the room cleaned. Adding to the suspicion, Steve's sister, Rosie, had been unable to reach him for several days before his death, highly unusual for him. The troubling signs didn't end there. Once Chris was informed, he visited Lana to check on her and discuss Steve's affairs. As executor of Steve's estate, he asked for the will. Lana claimed there wasn't one. Chris knew that was false. He'd seen it himself. The truth would emerge later. Lana had burned it. Along with other legal papers, the will had been destroyed in a fire she set, ensuring that under South Carolina law, she would inherit everything as his spouse. Barely 2 weeks after Steve's death, at a memorial gathering in his honor, friends and relatives noticed something else. Lana had already boxed up his possessions. As they mourned, she seemed more concerned with clearing out his belongings than with honoring his memory. She urged friends and relatives to take whatever belongings they wanted. Anything left over, she announced, would be hauled to the dump. It was an unsettling scene, more like someone clearing space than someone mourning a spouse. Nick and Chris Clayton, however, were not about to ignore their instincts. Quietly, they reached out to the York County morgue on behalf of the family, requesting a full autopsy and toxicology, without telling Lana. It was a decision that would prove critical. Forensic toxicologist Demi Garvin and coroner Sabrina Gass conducted the examination. The results left no room for doubt. Steve Clayton had been poisoned. His system contained extraordinarily high levels of tetrahydrozoline, the active ingredient in certain redness relief eye drops like Vicine. In the eyes, it constricts blood vessels. Swallowed in large amounts, it can shut down the respiratory system and cause death. Tetrahydrozoline is colorless, odorless, and tasteless, easy to slip into a drink unnoticed. In small doses, it causes nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea. In large doses, it becomes lethal. The next question was obvious. Had Steve ingested the poison knowingly, or had it been given to him without his knowledge? On August 29, 2018, investigators invited Lana in for questioning. They told her she wasn't in trouble, at least not yet. By then, she was aware an autopsy had been conducted without her consent, but she had no idea that FBI agents and York County Sheriff's Office investigators were in an adjacent room listening in. At first, Lana played the role of the bewildered widow, insisting she had no clue what could have caused Steve's death. But when detectives mentioned tetrahydrozoline, her reaction shifted immediately. She recognized the chemical without hesitation and even said Vicine aloud. It was a startlingly quick connection for such a specific substance, and it told investigators she knew far more than she was admitting. Pressed for answers, Lana spun her first story. She claimed Steve had been adding a few drops of Vicine to his morning coffee for regularity, using it as some sort of laxative. Investigators were skeptical. There were countless safe and widely available remedies for digestive issues. Why would anyone reach for an eye drop bottle? When that story began to crumble, she pivoted again. The grieving widow became the long-suffering spouse. Suddenly, Steve was, according to her, a verbally abusive, controlling man and a drug user. But detectives already had Steve's toxicology report. It showed no signs of heavy drug use. And when they looked into her abuse allegations, they found no supporting evidence. Realizing she was losing ground, Lana ended the interview and drove home, unaware that investigators were tailing her. Perhaps the pressure was too much, or perhaps she knew the truth was closing in, because shortly after arriving back at her house, she sat down with the investigators again and confessed. Lana claimed that after years of what she described as emotional abuse, she had snapped. She admitted to pouring an entire bottle of Vicine into Steve's water. She insisted she hadn't meant to kill him, only to make him ill for a day or two, enough to keep him from bothering her. Then, she revealed something even more disturbing. 2 years before Steve's death, Lana had called 911 to report a shocking accident. She claimed she had been loading a crossbow for protection one night when it discharged, striking Steve in the back of the head while he slept. She claimed she had been loading the weapon for protection when it discharged. Incredibly, Investigators at the time believed her, and Steve seemed to believe her too. Perhaps he thought there was simply no reason his wife would intentionally try to kill him. But on August 29th, 2018, during her confession, Lana admitted the truth. It hadn't been an accident. She said she had fired the crossbow on purpose to stop what she described as abuse, claiming she feared he would come after her. Her poisoning confession also began to unravel. Detectives examining the bedroom scene concluded that Steve's death hadn't been the result of a single impulsive act. For days, while he lay in bed suffering what she described as vertigo, Lana had been experimenting, adjusting the doses of tetrahydrozoline until she found the amount that would end his life. By the third day, she had given him a fatal dose. And then there was the missing phone. Investigators believe she threw Steve's cell into Lake Wylie to ensure that he could not call for help during his final hours, alone, immobile, and powerless. Although her admissions were damning, deputies didn't arrest her immediately. In the days that followed, Lana attempted to take her own life. She swallowed a large quantity of pills, turned on the gas inside her home, and was discovered by a neighbor who rushed to check on her. She survived, and on August 31st, 2018, she was taken into custody and charged with murder. Once the truth was out, Steve's family began to reconsider the years leading up to his death. They wondered if the move to South Carolina had been strategic, as state law guaranteed that a surviving spouse would inherit everything if there was no will. They thought back to Steve's unexplained bouts of illness over the preceding months, symptoms that even top doctors could not explain. The case would soon echo in another tragedy. Just 3 weeks after Steve's death, only 12 miles north of Lake Wylie, 32-year-old Stacy Hunsucker died under suspicious circumstances. Her husband, investigators say, poisoned her with Vicine to collect on a life insurance policy. Like Lana, he had her cremated immediately. But because Stacy was an organ donor, tissue tests were performed, and they revealed lethal levels of tetrahydrozoline. These two cases prompted significant changes in toxicology protocols across several states. Now, many laboratories routinely screen for tetrahydrozoline, a measure the Clayton family strongly advocated for. As for Lana, she ultimately pleaded guilty to manslaughter and to tampering with food and drugs. She continues to claim she never intended to kill Steve. Prosecutors, however, argued that her motive was money, pointing to her destruction of his will and the calculated steps she took to isolate him as he lay dying. In court, they painted a chilling picture. A wife who poisoned her husband over several days, ignored his suffering, and ensured he had no means to call for help. The defense argued she was a lifelong victim of sexual abuse, suffering from PTSD triggered during her marriage. The judge was unmoved. Lana Clayton was sentenced to 25 years in prison. At her sentencing, Steve's sister and a close friend spoke through tears, leaving no doubt in their minds, or the courts, about what had happened. Lana killed Steve. For those who loved Stephen Clayton, the truth was almost impossible to absorb. One close friend and family member recalled, "At that moment, my world changed forever." This was Lana, someone they had welcomed into their circle without hesitation. They had never seen her display anger, greed, or bitterness. She had always seemed kind, supportive, and warm. Now, by her own admission, she was a murderer. A woman who had carefully planned and successfully carried out the killing of their brother, their dearest friend. This was no sudden crime of passion. It was calculated, methodical, executed with precision. The reality brought with it a flood of painful questions. How long had Steve suffered? Were the unexplained bouts of illness he'd endured earlier that year the result of slow, deliberate poisoning? Was he trapped in his own home as his body failed? Did he try to seek help when he made his way downstairs that final day? Did he know his life was slipping away? The answers will likely never be known. But for those who loved him, the uncertainty is haunting. The grief of losing Steve was compounded by the betrayal. They hadn't just lost him, they had been deceived by the person responsible. Lana had been embraced as a friend, trusted completely. She had fooled them all, even Steve himself, a man described as one of the most brilliant people they had ever known. The case was as strange as it was disturbing, but Steve's family never stopped pushing for the truth. Their persistence turned suspicion into evidence and brought a calculated killer to justice. And in the end, it served as a grim reminder. If something feels wrong, it may be exactly what your instincts tell you it is.
Story number 5.
It was just past 11 p.m. when everything changed. In a small New York City apartment, the sound of a door being kicked in broke the quiet. What happened next was fast, loud, and terrifying. Neighbors heard the noise, shouting, banging, things crashing to the floor. Then suddenly, silence. Inside that apartment, a young woman was trapped in a moment she had feared for a long time. Someone she once loved had come back, and this time, he wasn't going to walk away quietly. This is the story of a night that started like any other, but ended in tragedy. In 2015, Elena Hardy arrived in New York City, full of ambition and promise. At 27, she was chasing her dream of becoming a physician's assistant. Her magnetic personality made her instantly likable, drawing people in wherever she went. With a bright future ahead, Elena immersed herself in her studies and embraced the vibrant rhythm of the city. But that hopeful journey took a dark turn when she met Fernando Munera. What began as a whirlwind romance quickly evolved into something far more dangerous. Their relationship, intense and passionate at first, soon spiraled into a toxic cycle of control, jealousy, and emotional turbulence. Friends and neighbors saw them often, walking their dog, riding his motorcycle, appearing close and inseparable. But behind those smiles was a relationship strained by volatility. As months passed, Munera's behavior grew increasingly erratic and aggressive. By early 2021, less than a year into their relationship, things had become violent. In a chilling incident, he restrained Elena in her own apartment, damaged her belongings, and seized her phone to prevent her from calling for help. That incident led to his arrest. Munera faced charges of harassment, unlawful imprisonment, and criminal mischief. A restraining order was issued, forbidding him from contacting Elena, but it didn't stop him. What followed was a pattern of relentless harassment. Munera began bombarding Elena with calls, dozens over a single weekend. He criticized her appearance, tried to control how she dressed, even while she was traveling. His obsession deepened, and his grip tightened. He couldn't bear the thought of her living independently, outside of his control. Neighbors grew uneasy. They noticed his erratic presence, muttering to himself, pacing furiously in front of the building. On May 19, 2021, the tension exploded. That evening, Munera was seen outside, consumed by anger, fists clenched, pacing with rage. He had argued with Elena earlier that day, and she had refused to let him into her apartment. He vanished for several hours. Many assumed the chaos had subsided, but Munera was preparing for something unthinkable. Sometime that night he returned, armed with a knife and an air pistol. Under the cover of darkness, he waited near Elena's apartment. Around 11 p.m., the horror unfolded. He forced his way into Elena's apartment. He smashed through the front door with violent determination, the barrier offering no resistance to the fury behind it. Inside, Elena barely had time to react. Startled by the crash, she was face to face with her ex before she could think, move, or scream. There was nowhere to run and nothing to stop him. Within seconds, the small apartment became a battleground. Munera, armed with a knife and consumed by rage, unleashed the full force of his obsession. He stabbed Elena 18 times. The knife tore through her upper body, each blow calculated, brutal, and unrelenting. The apartment echoed with the sounds of struggle, Elena's desperate cries, and the chaos that followed. The room was torn apart. Furniture lay overturned, blood streaked the walls, and the floor was slick with it. She cried out for help, but no one came. The neighbors heard everything, the thuds, the screaming, the crashing, but fear kept them frozen. Behind their closed doors, they listened as the violence continued, unaware of the full horror taking place just feet away. Munera didn't stop. He used the air pistol not as a weapon of death, but as a tool of fear, waving it, aiming it, showing Elena that even in her final moments, he was in control. His goal was not just to hurt her, it was to dominate her completely. She had tried to escape him, to set boundaries, to reclaim her life. That night, he took it back by force. When the attack finally ended, the apartment went still. The frenzy was over. Elena lay motionless, her body bearing the savage marks of the man who refused to let her go. Munera stood above her, breathing heavily, the blood still wet on his hands. There was no panic in him, no remorse, just the aftermath of a storm he had long planned. Then, without saying a word, he disappeared into the night. By the time police arrived, the damage was done. The apartment was a crime scene soaked in silence and horror. The young woman who had once lit up rooms with her energy and smile was gone. Her life had been reduced to blood on the floor and a still body in the dark. Officers found no signs of Munera. He was gone, vanished into the night like a ghost who left destruction in his wake. The manhunt began immediately. Police canvassed the area, questioned witnesses, tracked his movements. Surveillance footage from local stores and subway platforms began to fill in the gaps. One clip showed him walking briskly, still in the same blood-stained clothes, eerily calm, focused, as if the murder hadn't shaken him at all. Investigators delved into his past. What surfaced was deeply disturbing, a pattern of control, explosive tempers, and prior incidents of harassment and assault. Court records confirmed that Munera had always been volatile. Elena's death wasn't his first act of violence. It was the final one in a long line of red flags. The restraining order, a last resort, had failed her completely. Elena's family was shattered. Her mother couldn't believe that her daughter, the vibrant, funny, kind-hearted woman who had tried so hard to escape, was gone. The grief was heavy, made worse by the knowledge that Elena had done everything she could. She asked for help. She set boundaries. She took legal steps. But nothing had been enough. As news of the murder spread, New Yorkers took to the streets. Women marched in Elena's name. Vigils were held. Her story sparked a fire, one that spoke to thousands of women who had lived under the shadow of abuse. Elena's death became a symbol, a tragic reminder of how the system fails those most in need of protection. For weeks, Munera remained missing. Then came the tip. A motel outside the city. A man registered under a false name. Police moved in. They found him inside a small room, unshaven, paranoid, and hiding from the world. The arrest was quick. There was no fight left in him, just silence and the weight of what he'd done. As officers placed him in handcuffs and walked him out, there were no answers, only the echo of a question that haunted everyone who followed Elena's story. What twisted logic leads a man to murder the woman he claimed to love? There was no explanation, just a quiet ride in the back of a squad car and a life that could never be restored. At the precinct, Fernando Munera said nothing. He stared ahead, uncooperative, offering no explanation, no remorse. His silence didn't offer mystery, it confirmed it. Detectives had no confession to work with, only a chilling puzzle of obsessive behavior, digital breadcrumbs, and shattered lives. As the investigation deepened, a disturbing portrait came into focus. Munera hadn't seen Elena as a partner. He saw her as property, something to possess. And when she pulled away, when she stood her ground, he interpreted it as betrayal. In the months leading up to the trial, the evidence piled up. Witnesses had described Munera's erratic behavior in the days before the murder, pacing, muttering, fixated on Elena's apartment. Surveillance footage mapped his movements with eerie precision, tracking him from the streets to the door he eventually broke through. The forensic evidence told the rest of the story: fingerprints, DNA, and the marks left on Elena's body. No other suspects, no ambiguity. The case wasn't about who had committed the crime, but whether the system would deliver justice. The courtroom was packed on the first day of Munera's trial. Every seat was filled. The air was thick with tension, grief, fury, and the desperate hope that this time something would be made right. Elena's family sat at the front, eyes locked on the man who had taken her from them. The prosecution opened with a grim timeline, a detailed account of a man spiraling into possessive rage. They presented Munera as methodical, not impulsive. This wasn't a moment of madness. This was premeditation. They showed footage of Munera loitering outside Elena's building, his posture tense, his face tight with anger. They recounted how he had left, only to return with a knife and an air pistol. 2 weapons, not one. 2 decisions, not one. There was no hesitation, only escalation. Then came the photographs. The images taken at the crime scene silenced the room. Blood-soaked walls, torn furniture, a life brutally extinguished. A forensic pathologist walked the jury through the wounds. 18 stab wounds, concentrated on the upper body. Not random, not frenzied, controlled, targeted, intentional. Each one was described in clinical terms, but no language could soften the horror of what had been done. A neighbor described the noises on the night of the murder, the crashing, the faint screams, then nothing. Another recalled Munera outside earlier that evening, pacing like a man on the edge, fists clenched, muttering to himself, his eyes full of something unspoken but dangerous. Elena's friends shared the things she had said in the final days of her life. She had been scared. She had told them about the calls, the threats, the constant pressure to change how she looked, how she dressed. One friend read a message aloud. "I'm scared of what he might do, but I don't know how to make him stop." It landed like a blow. The room fell silent. There were tears. Then the defense stood up. Their story was different. They didn't deny the attack. They didn't deny the death. Instead, they painted Munera as a man unraveling, pushed too far, too fast, by a relationship he couldn't process. They argued that he had snapped after being locked out. That it wasn't planned. It was emotional collapse. They cited a history of mental health struggles, suggesting his actions were the result of an undiagnosed condition. They called a psychologist to the stand who spoke of trauma, instability, and psychological deterioration. But the prosecution didn't flinch. They fired back with clarity and conviction. Munera didn't snap. He planned. He paced, returned, and armed himself. He broke down a door. He used 2 weapons. He stabbed a defenseless woman 18 times. Then he disappeared. This was not the act of a man in emotional freefall. This was cold, calculated violence. There was no breakdown. There was no temporary lapse. There was only control, hatred, and the fatal outcome of unchecked obsession. Munera had made his decision long before that night, and Elena Hardy had paid the price for it with her life. As the trial progressed, the courtroom became a charged space where two clashing versions of Fernando Munera stood side by side. The defense fought to present a broken man, remorseful, overwhelmed, and pushed beyond his limits. But the prosecution offered a far more terrifying reality: that Elena Hardy, in her final moments, endured terror, helplessness, and pain at the hands of a man who saw her independence as defiance and her existence as something to control or destroy. Elena's family never missed a day in court. Her mother sat with a framed photo of her daughter clutched to her chest, the kind of photograph that once captured a life full of light and hope. Tears flowed freely every time the prosecution revisited the brutality of the crime, but beyond the grief, there was resolve. Elena's mother had vowed that Munera would not walk away from what he had done. In closing arguments, the prosecution gave voice to that promise. They asked the jury to look at Munera not as a tragic figure, but as a deliberate predator. This wasn't a tragic mistake. It was cold, unrelenting violence. Elena was not his partner. She had become his target the moment she fought to reclaim her life. The defense made one last effort to salvage Munera's image. They pleaded for understanding, repeating that he had acted in a moment of emotional collapse. They pointed to his remorse, to his troubled past, to the letters from his friends describing a kind and caring man. But those words couldn't erase the evidence, the images, the witness accounts, the 18 stab wounds, or the months of escalating harassment. The jury deliberated for hours, each face drawn and heavy as they filed back into the courtroom. When the verdict was announced, guilty of second-degree murder, the air shifted. Relief, heartbreak, and the weight of finality filled the room. Elena's family held each other tightly. It wasn't closure. Nothing could bring her back. But it was a step toward justice. A month later, the courtroom was filled again, this time for sentencing. Elena's mother rose to give her victim impact statement. Her hands shook, but her voice carried the heartbreak of a life forever altered. She spoke about the emptiness left behind, about the silence in her home where Elena's laughter once lived. "She was my everything," she said, "and now she's gone. Not because of an accident, but because someone made a choice." The prosecution laid out the case again, this time focusing on consequences. They argued for the maximum sentence. They emphasized the calculated nature of the crime, how Munera had ignored the restraining order, how the violence had built steadily, and how the law must not take lightly the loss of a young woman's life. The defense responded with what little they had left. They tried to appeal to compassion. Then Munera spoke. He stood slowly, pale and visibly shaken. Facing Elena's family, he mumbled an apology, quiet, strained, almost inaudible. "I'm sorry," he said. "I never meant for this to happen." But the room stayed silent. For those who had lived through the trauma of Elena's loss, words couldn't fix what he'd shattered. The pain was too deep, the apology far too late. The judge delivered the sentence with solemn clarity. Munera was sentenced to 40 years to life in prison. The courtroom stayed quiet as the verdict sank in. Elena's family clung to one another, tears falling freely. It was not victory. It was not healing. But it was justice. Something to hold on to in the face of immeasurable loss. As Munera was led away in handcuffs, his fate sealed, the courtroom began to empty. But Elena's legacy was just beginning to grow. Her murder sparked something bigger, a renewed call to action. Her family, refusing to let her death be the end of her story, became advocates against domestic violence. They partnered with local organizations, launched awareness campaigns, and hosted events to educate others about the signs of abuse and the danger of ignoring red flags. The restraining order Elena had taken out, ignored, violated, and ultimately useless, became a symbol of how the system had failed her. Activists used her story as a rallying cry, urging lawmakers to strengthen protections for victims and enforce them with real consequences. Elena's friends spoke often about the woman she was. They remembered her laughter, her determination, her dreams of becoming a physician's assistant. She was kind, ambitious, and full of life. They made sure that when people spoke her name, they didn't only remember how she died, but who she truly was. In the end, Elena Hardy's story became more than a headline. It became a movement, a reminder, a warning, and a reason to fight harder for those who are still living in fear.
Story number 6.
Every afternoon, Jennifer Soto would wait by the gate of Hunter Screw School to pick up her daughter, watching as her classmates trickled out one by one. But one day, everything felt different. Jennifer wondered why Madeline was taking so long. At 13 years old, she could sometimes be forgetful, but this was becoming unusual. When the last student left the building and Madeline was still nowhere to be seen, Jennifer's worry turned to fear. She hurried to one of the teachers and asked if something had happened, only to be met with a chilling response. Madeline hadn't been to school since Monday, February 26, 2024. Trying to stay calm, Jennifer replayed the morning's events in her mind. Madeline had woken up on time, packed her backpack, and dressed for school, just like any other day. Her stepfather, Stefan Stearns, was supposed to drive her as usual, or at least that's what Jennifer had believed. But what had really happened to Madeline? Could there be a hidden family secret that explained her disappearance? The details of Madeline Soto's short life remain mostly private out of respect for her as a minor and because of the crimes committed against her. Even the specifics of the investigation following her disappearance were kept largely under wraps. One chilling fact that did surface was that just hours before her tragic end, Madeline had celebrated her birthday. Her stepfather, Stefan Stearns, had organized the event, as her mother Jennifer was working late. That detail became even more ominous in light of what later unfolded. Madeline had been happily celebrating her 13th birthday, but the very next day, everything would change. The mystery of her disappearance began to unravel, aided by security camera footage from her neighborhood and the building where she lived with her mother and stepfather. When she was reported missing, the town of Kissimmee, Florida, was gripped with fear. No one knew where she could have gone or where to even start looking. Her parents gave interviews on television, expressing confusion just like their neighbors. They claimed the morning had been just like any other, and insisted that Madeline had never shown any signs of wanting to run away. In those early hours, authorities still considered the possibility that she might have left on her own, although Jennifer was adamant that there had been no family conflict. However, what Jennifer viewed as normal family dynamics might not have been as harmonious as she believed. Investigators, familiar with such cases, kept a close eye on those closest to the girl. Something might have been going on inside the home that wasn't immediately visible. Jennifer told the police, and later the media, that she had seen her daughter getting ready for school that morning. She hadn't noticed anything out of the ordinary. Madeline had even left her cell phone behind, something her mother didn't find odd due to the girl's attention deficit disorder, which often made her forgetful. What stood out, though, was that Stefan Stearns had also left his phone at home, leaving no way to track either of them. Madeline had supposedly gotten into her stepfather's car as usual for the drive to school. Their routine was that Stefan would drop her off a short distance from the school so she could walk the remaining way. In interviews, Stearns appeared deeply regretful, saying he felt guilty for not making sure she had made it safely inside. Jennifer, however, was convinced her daughter had been kidnapped. There had been no ransom demands or clear signs of abduction, but authorities focused on the family's cell phones and Madeline's social media for clues. From the start, something seemed off about Stearns' statements. He mentioned taking anti-anxiety medication to cope with Madeline's disappearance, but his story didn't add up. He claimed that he had driven her to school via Union Parkway, then detoured to a McDonald's before getting lost. Later, he said he had gone back home to retrieve a remote control for a gate, and after that, mentioned buying tobacco. At one point, he even said he had a flat tire. Investigators suspected that something darker was being hidden in these confusing accounts. The breakthrough came when authorities searched the family's phones and reviewed security footage. Their goal was to pinpoint when and where Madeline deviated from her usual route to school. The first disturbing clue came from footage outside their apartment building. At 7:35 a.m. on the day she disappeared, Stearns was seen walking toward a dumpster carrying Madeline's backpack and laptop. Without hesitation, he tossed them into the trash before heading back inside. This indicated that he never intended to take her to school that day. The second discovery was even more horrifying. Stearns' phone contained hundreds of recently deleted files. He claimed they were lost due to a technical glitch, but forensic software revealed the contents, countless images and videos of abuse, with Madeline as the victim in most of them. Faced with this evidence, police immediately arrested Stearns, suspecting not only that he had been abusing Madeline for at least 2 years, but also that he had a hand in her disappearance. The security footage, combined with the digital evidence, pointed to a devastating conclusion. Not only had Madeline not run away, but she had likely been murdered by the very person she trusted to protect her. The city was plastered with posters of Madeline Soto's face and description. Police officers combed both the urban areas and the nearby forests, hoping to find the 13-year-old girl. The missing persons posters described her as a blonde teenager with fair skin and blue eyes. At the time of her disappearance, she had been wearing a green t-shirt, black shorts, and white Crocs. Despite these efforts, no neighbors reported seeing her, but the description did confirm investigators' growing fears. Footage from a security camera captured Stefan Stearns' car returning to their building around 8 a.m. Stearns claimed he had returned to get a remote control, but the footage showed something more troubling. In the passenger seat was a young girl slumped over, matching Madeline's description. For the investigators, this wasn't a hopeful sign. They didn't believe Stearns had brought her home. Instead, they suspected that by then, Madeline was already dead. Multiple security clips taken between 7:36 and 8:19 a.m. showed the girl in the same exact position. Another clip showed Stearns at 9:42 a.m., loading something large into the trunk of his car, which investigators believed to be a body. Convinced that Stearns had killed Madeline, though they hadn't yet found her body, police broke the devastating news to Jennifer, her mother. Jennifer was shocked, struggling to process this turn in the investigation. However, there were still unanswered questions for the police. Jennifer seemed unaware of the abuse Madeline had suffered at the hands of her stepfather. She then began to share unsettling details about their family life. She revealed that Madeline often slept in the same bed as her and Stearns, a behavior she didn't find unusual. At times, Madeline and her stepfather even slept alone in the marital bed, which Jennifer excused by saying her daughter needed physical contact to sleep. Despite these red flags, no one in Madeline's circle admitted that something was terribly wrong. The evidence recovered from Stern's phone spoke for itself. Detectives had managed to retrieve 1,700 explicit photos and videos, confirming their worst fears. Stearns was not only a predator, but also likely Madeline's killer. For 4 days, police units searched tirelessly for her, and eventually, their grim suspicions were confirmed. Madeline's body was found discarded in a wooded area not far from her mother's home, and the man suspected of murdering her. Authorities kept many details about Madeline's death and the location of her body private, out of respect for her. However, on March 1, 2024, the police confirmed that they had found her body in a heavily wooded area in Osceola County. The discovery followed a tip from a witness who claimed to have seen Stearns that morning, pulled over by the roadside to change a tire, just as Stearns had mentioned. At that point, it seemed likely that Stearns had already disposed of Madeline's body in the woods. As part of the investigation, local police circulated photos of Stearns and his car, hoping someone would come forward with information about his movements on the day of the crime. On March 1st, search teams scoured an area near the I-4 highway where they eventually found human remains. The discovery was particularly haunting, as days earlier, investigators had found a note on Madeline's social media. In it, she wrote about a dream of living in the woods when she turned 13, a dream that tragically came true in the worst possible way. Stearns had been taken into custody days earlier after investigators uncovered the incriminating material on his phone. Once Madeline's body was found, a formal arrest warrant was issued for him on March 4th. He faced charges not only for murder but also for years of abuse, with the evidence showing that Madeline had been his victim since the age of 11. Despite the sensitive nature of the case, there was a shocking incident involving the sheriff of Osceola County. Less than 24 hours after Madeline's body was found, the sheriff accidentally posted a photo of the crime scene on Instagram. In the image, the clothing matched what Madeline had been wearing when she disappeared. The post was quickly removed, and he apologized, insisting it was an accident. Nonetheless, the public and media were outraged, calling for his resignation. In the aftermath, it became clear that Madeline had endured years of unimaginable suffering in her home, and the community was shaken. School officials offered support to both students and staff. The Friday that Madeline's body was found, a prayer vigil was held at her school, but nothing seemed enough to heal the scars of her ordeal. 2 months after the crime, Stefan Stearns was charged with first-degree murder and awaited trial. He faced a possible sentence of 25 years to life in prison, with prosecutors signaling that they might seek the death penalty. The media continued to cover the case, despite the secrecy surrounding it, and Madeline's biological father finally spoke to the press. He expressed deep regret for not being able to protect his daughter. Although he had lived far from her, he maintained close contact, having last spoken to her just hours before her death on her 13th birthday. He never imagined that the next day, his daughter would be missing. Although Jennifer Soto, Madeline's mother, had not been implicated in the crime, there were still lingering questions about her role. Investigators questioned whether she had been aware of the abuse or even helped cover it up. She had initially lied, saying she had seen Madeline that morning, when in reality, the last time she had seen her daughter was at 11 p.m. the night before. There was even uncertainty about when exactly Madeline had been killed. Perhaps it had happened during the night of her birthday. As the trial against Stearns approached, local authorities implemented new measures to prevent future tragedies like Madeline's. Schools in the county now notify parents immediately if their child doesn't show up for class, in the hopes of catching warning signs earlier.